Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We're glad to have you back to the class, and I have two people that I'd love to introduce to you today. One is Bambi Bowden, who is part of our team here at HeartBridge, and she is going to be helping me with the interview. So, welcome, Bambi.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
And Michele Robinson is Dr. Michele Robinson. She is a doctor, psychology and positive psychology specific. Has worked with many um uh, children with trauma. And so I'm going to let her kind of introduce herself and tell just a little bit about her work and what she does. And then we'll get back to some specific questions. Well, Michele, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's nice to be here. As Bill said, I am a licensed psychologist and have been practicing now, I always forget, since 2004. So, very long time. And I work a lot with teenagers specifically. That is my favorite population to work with. And in working with teenagers, you see a whole gamut of issues and problems, and a lot of it having to do with trauma. I'm also a certified traumatologist, so that's been very helpful in the work that I do with teenagers.
So, what is a certified traumatologist?
You go through some extensive training and learn. Really, it's interesting because it's all kinds of trauma. It's about anything from being a first responder to working with people, as I do in private practice, and just working with trauma, understanding all the different kind of ways to deal with trauma, types of trauma, understanding it. And then I just I need continuing education units all the time to renew licensure. And so, as part of that, I continue to take courses that have to do with trauma, looking at some of the latest treatments and new information that we find.
Okay. And it really is a relatively new field as far as where people have gotten involved in, the way I understand it. How long have you been teaching specific trauma? Um, how can I say this? I guess counseling trauma students.
Wow.
Have you started? I mean, was it something that you started in 2004 and have kept up, or was it something major?
Yeah, actually, no. I mean, I think what happened is my husband and I had a nonprofit up until just a few years ago where we worked in Kenya. And a whole long story I will not get into, but we ended up adopting our daughter from Kenya, who has a lot of trauma, had a lot of trauma in her life. And me, just as a mom, wanting to really understand trauma at that level. It's like a whole nother level when you're talking about third world country and some of the things that she experienced. And so I kind of started it from that standpoint, and then really started. And then some of the work we did in Kenya was going into situations where there was war, actually, and we were kind of stepping in. And then once the kind of wars, land clashes were over, I was teaching and found a lot of the people that I was teaching, a lot of these pastors and their families were very traumatized. And so I ended up just, yeah, it just kept getting drawn more and more into it. And then working with teens, just started seeing and noticing and getting a lot more clients over the last several years of dealing with lots of different trauma, particularly sexual assault. That's probably the biggest.
Well, that was my next question. In that, what trauma have you seen mostly out of teenagers that are coming to you? Is it the sexual trauma or what? And speak to that just a little bit.
Yeah, in terms of, a lot of it is sexual assault, and even just seeing adults who experience sexual assault in their childhood who are now adults and for the first time really dealing with it, because I also do work with adults. But also just there's a lot of it, and bullying, I try to be very careful with that word. I personally think it can be overused. But there are definitely I get some students who've just experienced some, and I also try to be careful with the word trauma, yeah. just social challenges that make it very difficult for them to even want to go to school.
What we have seen and experienced in the experiences that that HeartBridge has been working with is that trauma can start young in life, but some of it doesn't even manifest itself until later in life. Can you speak to that and what you see in that with even teenagers that may have experienced trauma early in their lives, and then all of a sudden now it's coming out or something brings it to light?
Yes, absolutely. I have a client, I just actually saw her today that I'm thinking of, that she has experienced some trauma, some abandonments earlier in life, and then she has experienced some sexual assaults that I really think she needs to work through, and yet I don't know that she's ready. I won't go into the details of the case, but I think that I'm going to give her skills and tools and help her with some other kinds of coping mechanisms dealing with the things that she wants to address and work on. But I have a feeling, and I've sort of planted the seeds, that there will be a point in her life where it's going to be very important not to minimize these experiences, that actually it's going to create further problems down the road, particularly in relationships.
Yeah, even later when she gets married, and even later than that. Yeah. So as you have seen these kids come in that have been traumatized in some way, is there something that you could look at and say, wow, I see patterns here. I see patterns maybe even now that I did not see earlier?
Well, I think one of the things that's important, that anytime I talk about trauma, I like to be clear. I mean, trauma is this sort of intense, unexpected event that can either be life-threatening, or it can be something that just causes physical or emotional pain in some way. And I think we need to be careful that trauma doesn't then equate to PTSD. So I have another client who just experienced a traumatic event, and people talk a lot about, oh, it must be PTSD. And it's important to understand, if you think that way, then you're likely to exacerbate the symptoms that are normal symptoms. This client who just had a traumatic event, that I do think she's going to heal from fine. The first 30 days, I think it's important for people to understand, regardless of what kind of background life you have, how healthy you are likely going to experience a range of symptoms that might seem PTSD like. For example, you might be ruminating about the event, and you might see images in your mind. You might have some nightmares. You might have kind of an exaggerated startle response. Your brain is trying to process this event that is out of the ordinary and make sense of it so it can compartmentalize it. And so it is very common for people to have various kinds of symptoms. And I really want people to understand that, because I think it's so important. They interviewed people at West Point graduates, and they had all heard of PTSD. No one had heard of post-traumatic growth. And so it's just very few people had. So it's just one of the things I think of, people who fare better are people who understand that, okay, some of what I'm experiencing right now is pretty normal, and that it doesn't feel okay, but it is okay that I'm having these kind of weird reactions that I wouldn't in my normal life had this event not happened. And I do think the people that do better are also people who have a healthy optimism. People who are overly optimistic don't fare as well, because then they're just completely slammed and floored, and it's like, bad things aren't supposed to happen. But people who understand that, you know what, bad stuff happens in life, and yet I can be okay. I can grow through it. So that kind of internal locus of control, that kind of growth mindset, healthy optimism, people tend to do better in those kinds of scenarios. I don't even know if I answered your question in there.
No, that was fantastic. In fact, you said about 2 hours worth right there that I thought was perfect. But let me break some of this down. You
Sure.
mentioned PTSG, which is post traumatic growth, PTG. I'm sorry.
Yes.
And how do you help kids with PTG? How do you help kids move from thinking they have PTSD or PTSD to PTG?
Well, I think part of it first is normalizing their initial. If you can get them early in the events, if it's an event, sometimes people are exposed to ongoing trauma, and that's
Right.
that's a different animal, different treatment. Um, but with an event, helping them understand that it is normal to have these symptoms. You are okay. You may not feel okay. You may not like this, but you just need to know that it's normal, and this is what your brain's trying to do. Because then it's kind of like, oh, okay, that's super helpful. Helping and then looking at, does this person have a growth mindset? Do they understand, and that healthy optimism that bad stuff can happen, but I really can grow through this, and not right away. But one of the things I try to do first, you got to help them work through the event or the traumatic event. But then kind of looking at, how do you think you grew through this? What did you maybe learn from this? Talking about resiliency and how can you use this in your life? Because now it's part of your story. So rather than try to just forget it, that doesn't really help make you more resilient, and doesn't contribute to post-traumatic growth. But how did I grow through this? What did I learn? What's different? Although, you hear a lot of people say things like, I if I would have known beforehand, I would have never wanted this to happen in my life. But afterwards, it's like I am changed because of it, and I'm changed for the better.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, that's fantastic. You actually said something there that I'm not sure that I have heard before as we've been going through this, and that is that part of the uh, part of the part of the growth is a good thing. And I say I haven't heard. We have talked about that. There was something else that you said that stuck out. Do you remember what it was, Bambi? It may have been. I may have to come back to that. But great stuff here, Michele. I appreciate this. So you've got a teacher, okay, and the teacher now has kids, and we're not asking the teacher to do any counseling or anything, but how can the teacher help with, let's say, the growth mindset? So you mentioned the growth mindset, and some people know what that is, some people don't. But how could you counsel a teacher in saying, okay, here's how you help your kids with that, and especially kids that are going through trauma in a classroom?
Number one, before you even get to the growth mindset and working on post-traumatic growth, the most important thing a teacher can do, or anyone working with students who've had trauma, is to be this non-anxious, compassionate sense of support. Meaning, if you're getting emotional or anxious when a child is speaking to you about what they're going on, first of all, it's hard for them to do that. It takes a lot for someone to share their experience, and they're watching. They are so watching your reaction. And if your reaction is one of anxiety, like you're anxious, or they can tell you're getting emotional yourself about it, they're going to back down.
Wow.
Or they're going to try and take care of you. Or they're going to get more anxious themselves, because then it feeds into their own anxiety.
Yeah.
So it's really important that I am here. I am listening with compassion, but I'm not getting caught up in the emotion of it. And I don't know that it's something everyone can do. It just takes, like, I am here to support you. I believe in you. I know you can get through this, and I am this strong rock for you. that you can kind of share your experience with. That is number one. One of the most important aspects of anyone healing from trauma is they have somebody in their life like that.
Wow. That's pretty deep. And I say deep. That's important that, and I would guess that most teachers, a lot of teachers would do that automatically. You know, they would feel that automatically, but some, like the first time when I was teaching and I had a young lady, young girl, 12 years old, come up and say, my dad, I'm sleeping with my dad. And I'm not sure what my I'm not sure what my face looked like when she said that, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not sure I gave her the right support. It might have been one of crazy emotion. I didn't start crying or anything, but it was like, okay, shock here. This is not a good thing. So as you talk to kids that come in, is there, and I may have asked this at the very first, but I can't remember, is there one trauma that you see more or more often than any other that happens to, come into your world?
Yeah, I would say sexual assault is probably the most common. And then the second would be various kind of more, I don't know, micro versus macro type of social situations at school, that it's more of a buildup of lots of very unhealthy, scary type of situations that make them feel very anxious to be at school.
So,
Schools
so
aren't
it's like
always healthy environments.
and so would you put that into the continuous trauma? What do you call that? The something that's coming over and over and over?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So repeated traumas, like
repeated.
there's type 1 and type 2. So type 2 would be where there's repeated traumas. And it's again, they're micro. It's like it's a buildup of all these different kinds of negative social interactions that contribute to them then being very fearful of being at school.
And I wonder if some of that could come from maybe having some bad experiences, and then all of a sudden that fixed mindset says that's who I am, instead of, let me try to grow out of this. And I know because of my relationship with you and understanding where you're coming from, the positive psychology of that, is so powerful, that there's a positive side to this, and it's not all that negative. And I sure appreciate you sharing that part of that here in just a little bit. Well, I'm going to let Bambi jump in here in just a minute, but I've got another question. We have found a lot of older, I say older, let's say early 30s. Um, that's younger for me, but I mean older, not teenagers, but older adults that would have kids that have um, experienced trauma from narcissist parents. And so my question, and it almost seems like it's rampant. I mean, everywhere I look, they just kind of come at us. And I'm thinking, how much do you see that? And can you, as a teacher, can you help us identify maybe some of those kids that are in that arena?
Yes, I can think of a few that I have right now. That is the issue, that it creates mental health issues for sure.
Yeah.
And what was your question about that? Do I see that? Yeah, I do.
And then can you help with teachers in being able to maybe identify, can you see that happening, or is it something that maybe is deeper than that? These particular people that have come, it has manifested later in life. So it's like something happens to them, when they're 25 or 30, that all of a sudden brings back this narcissist parent that they really thought was normal,
Mm-hmm.
until somebody said, yeah, that's not normal. This is, and so I'm just saying, I don't know if you want to speak to that or say, can you help teachers in some way navigate through that or be able to identify it, I think.
I think it's really understanding someone's story and their own background, upbringing, relationship with parents that you don't quite know. I will say that my experience with people who've had narcissistic parents is they definitely grow up feeling unwanted, not cared for, they don't matter, they're unlovable. But I mean, that can be, coming from a lot of things. So to really, you can't just say, oh, you must have had a narcissistic parent. Like having those thoughts and beliefs about yourself then don't mean that. So it's really important to kind of understand someone's own experience, really taking the time to listen and hear someone's story, to ask questions and listen.
Okay. I'm going to come back a little bit later after Bambi asks some questions and deal a little bit with teachers in the classroom and how can you maybe identify, or what would you do if you identified some child? So, but Bambi, you go ahead and ask some questions that have come to your mind.
Well, the foremost question for me, because I'm seeing it also, why do you think sexual assault is on the rise? I have questioned, is it because we're becoming more desensitized as a society? What is the catalyst that, because I'm seeing it ramped up younger children, more children. It's really coming to the forefront. And I just don't know why.
Yeah, I think you're right. We are being desensitized. So Bambi, I think you're right about that. And I think technology exposes people to pornography, just the world has changed. And I do think that, the invention of, I don't want to just blame the iPhone, but smartphones there's so much good to that, but there's also been so much bad.
That makes a lot of sense to me. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Also, have you seen any particular, do you think COVID these past few years have played a part on trauma, in that there's certain significant things that have happened, or even in that too? I wonder if we haven't changed a little bit as a society from that. What do you think the impact of COVID has had?
Well, what I think is interesting, my experience working with a lot of teens is initially when COVID hit, they were isolated and getting very depressed because of the isolation. And then what was so fascinating to me is that they got so used to that. And again, a lot of them started reaching out and connecting with friends regardless of what they were supposed to be doing, just because that social connection is important. But when it came time to go back to a real social environment like school, not just one-on-one with a friend, which parents would say, okay, you can get together with this person, do certain things, but now back to a bigger social environment, that kids that never in their life before struggled with social anxiety, suddenly these kids don't want to go back to school. Now, some of them didn't want to go back because online's easier. I don't have to listen. It's easier to cheat, like all the things. There's so many things. But a lot of it was genuinely kids being really anxious about having to engage socially again because they got so used to being isolated, and the whole, and again, think about the adolescent years, and building your sense of self is so much based on interaction with other people. So now they're questioning themselves even more. So it's been fascinating, not in a good way, but fascinating nonetheless to witness.
Well, I think there's been a lot of fear. It seems that fear is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Fear is really hard, especially when you're less mature and you don't have the life experience or the faculties to deal with that. Do you think that is a part of the contribution? We're afraid of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Connection has been downplayed, and it seems like the fear has become prominent.
Right. And I do really believe technology does play a huge role in that, because when you look at, and I apologize, I wish numbers stuck in my head. I am not a numbers person. A number could come in and it leaves right away. But the significance of how many students or young people spend in face-to-face, in-person communication on a given week has just plummeted. It's plummeted. That it's all through not even what we're doing, which is at least, we are being able to see each other as we communicate. It's all through social media, that they're not actually communicating, and they're more scared to do so. I know now, I learned this a long time ago, that when my clients talk to me about they had a conversation with a friend, or they got in an argument with a friend, it's all through. I have to ask, did you talk to your friend face to face? Did you talk to your friend on the phone? Did you talk to your friend this way? Or was it just simply social media? I have to ask every time, and I'll tell you, probably 90 to 95% of the time it's social media. It's not even direct conversation.
Yeah. And that's how we learn. That's how we learn how to interact. That's how we learn how to.
Absolutely.
I know. And so we've taken that whole, factor out of
And
our.
and so going back to Bambi's point of fear, they don't know how to engage face to face with people, to handle conflict, to just have conversation, and there's so much fear around that. COVID didn't help that, but I don't think COVID caused that. I think that's been ongoing for a very long time.
Okay.
It's important to know, how to solve your own problems, problem solving. When back back in the days when I was in school, I think we had less intervention, in that we were able to work through things.
Mm-hmm.
As children, I don't know how we had those skills, but maybe less adults intervened. I really don't know, but when there was something going on, we seemed to have more gentle ways of solving those issues.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what has happened. I do think the technology does really come into play, because it seems like people can be much more brave when they're behind the screen. Absolutely. And they can be actually hateful, mm-hmm. when you're not right there feeling that person's energy and looking into their eyes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I just came from a seminar that I gave, that you had the teachers and administrators in the audience, and I could read their faces. And that makes all the difference in the world in feedback to me. And on social media, they don't have that. So it's like, it's like a text. How do you read what they're really saying?
Right. And if they're left unopened, they're unopened. So they send a message, it's left unopened. I don't even know how they know. No, it's been unopened. But they feel like they're being ghosted. If 2 hours go by, if it's not immediate, I mean, it's so interesting how anxious they get.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Bambi, anything else there?
No, that was a lot. I mean, your answers give us a lot of food for thought, and they resonate when you start to think about it. I mean, it really resonates.
Let me ask you, for teachers, what kind of advice, I think, that you could give to them for uh, for I think noticing or identifying possibly children with trauma. So you're a teacher in the classroom, you're there for the first day or second day, doesn't matter. And all of a sudden you look and you say, these are red flags going up that could be kids that are really experiencing trauma.
Well, some of the most common and probably obvious are kids that are kind of more isolating and kind of keep to themselves. I think those are kids, because we're really not by nature wired that way, to isolate and keep to ourselves. And so that would be something I would look for. I would also pay attention to their demeanor in the classroom. Are they aggressive, acting out, whether that be just kind of disruptive in the classroom, whether that be aggressive with other students, irritable, agitated a lot, tired, like not getting enough sleep. It's a huge issue for me, like in terms of something I address with everybody, the impact of sleep on our ability to deal with just life in general. So do they seem more fatigued? Are they focused? Do you just notice shift in the child? Like if you happen to know this student and then all of a sudden they're not quite themselves, what's going on in their personal life? So, those would be things I would be looking for.
Okay. And any other kind of suggestions for teachers once you notice these kinds of things? What would be your, in your experience, the best approach to a child to maybe probe into maybe some of the things going on in their life?
Well, I would, if there is a particular teacher, and it depends on the age of the child, whether it's like you have the same teacher throughout your day, and then there comes a point where you have different teachers. But if there is a teacher that already has a bit of a relationship with that student, that I would go with that first, like let that person be the one to approach them, because they'll feel a little bit more of a comfort level. But if not, if it's the same teacher in every class, then just to sit down and just, I would point out specifics, because if just say, hey, are you okay? I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right. So, kind of like teens, the big joke, how was your day? Fine. So it's more about kind of sitting down. Hey, I've noticed these things. Point out 2 or 3 specific behaviors that you've noticed. And I'm just kind of concerned about you and wondering what's going on. Try to ask an open-ended question instead of, are you okay? What's going on? How are things at home? Tell me what's going on there. If you happen to know anything about their home life, like maybe a sick parent or something, asking about that. How's your mom doing? I know she's been dealing with cancer. Or knowing something about your students' lives. It's, sometimes a big ask depending on how many students you have. But if you have an opening that way too, that could be helpful. But I think starting with, these are some specifics I've noticed, because then that student's like, oh, they are noticing. I can't just say fine, because I can, but obviously I'm maybe not being truthful, because it's going to be obvious to this teacher, because they're noticing some very specific things that they're pointing out to me.
So the last question I have, and thank you so much, Michele. These have been great answers. In fact, some of the answers I'm not so sure that I've heard from some of the materials, some of the other materials that we've had. So I think this will be a great addition. But anyway, one of the things is I know you are in an arena of positive psychology. How has positive psychology been different from the regular psychology, and how do you see it as being more helpful, if you will, than let's say just regular psychology?
Well, I've always been an evidence-based psychologist. So, at cognitive behavioral therapy, neuroscience, positive psychology, things that are grounded in science that we know work. And so before I even knew what positive psychology was, it wasn't something I learned in school, because I'm a dinosaur, and positive psychology actually didn't exist when I was in grad school. Dr. Seligman had not yet come up with it, but I always talked about, and I kind of used to have this thing, and it might still be on my website, like, be the outlier. Why do we always look at what's going wrong with people? Why don't we ever look at what's going right? And how can we capitalize on the things that are going well, or how they've gotten through past difficulties, looking for their strengths and how they've grown through challenges in their life, and capitalize on those things to help them with their current struggles. It's just an approach that just so came naturally. I don't know if I ever learned it. I didn't learn it. I just did it. And so when I found positive psychology, I was like, oh my gosh, I finally fit. I found something that really resonates with me. It's not, I mean, obviously in my job, we got to look at what's not going well, but I think we miss so much when we only look at what's wrong and we don't look at what's right and what's well in your life. So it's been a game changer for me, just in terms of me feeling like, oh my gosh, I actually fit in this profession, because I've always felt like I've operated maybe a little differently than others in my work, but it works. So I just kept doing it.
So people that are watching this, thousands of people, and they hear this and they see and they go, wow, this is not the kind of therapy that my child is getting. Do they get in touch with you, or how do they find a positive psychologist that can help them in their area? Do you know?
They can get in touch with me, and if I know somebody in their area, then I could certainly assist with that. That would be, a possibility. I would, you've got to be a consumer. You got to call. You got to ask questions. I would ask about their approach to treatment, and they may not even use the language of positive psychology, but they can certainly ask, like, do you use kind of positive psychology principles? It is actually becoming more popular, and I'm so happy to hear that it's finally being taught in grad schools. So that might be something that some of them have had training in. What evidence-based strategies do you use? So I would ask questions like that. Do you give homework? To me, therapy has been pretty watered down sometimes, where it's like, let's chit chat about your week. And that's not really therapy. So
that's not part of the growth that the positive. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. That's interesting that you do that, because a lot of the ones that I'm familiar with do not give much for kids to look at, or even adults to look at. So any last words, Michele? Thank you so much. Do you want to give your website out?
Sure. My website is really just my name, www.michele with one L, Robison, no N in the middle, Robison, I should say. So www.michellerobison.com.
Okay. Well, what I want to say, thank you so much for the time that you've given, and thank you for your life and what you're giving, because it's not easy. I mean, it wasn't easy for me to get this interview because you're so busy, and that's a good thing, but it's not a good thing when I'm trying to get something done, and I'm just messing with you. But thank you so much for this, and we will be in touch, and people, I would highly suggest if to go find her website and take a look at what she's got available if you've got kids that are in any kind of need at all.
And I have some blogs on there that could be helpful too on my website that they could read.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you again.
All right.
I appreciate it so much.